Tensions between Washington and Europe are rising again, and this time President Donald Trump has sparked a political storm with some of his strongest criticism yet of European leaders and their handling of the war in Ukraine. In a new interview with Politico, Trump didn't hold back, calling European leaders weak and even hinting that the United States could scale back its support for Kyiv unless major changes are made. During the interview, Trump accused what he described as decaying European countries of failing to control migration and failing to take real action to end the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia. According to him, Europe has been content to let Ukraine fight until they drop, while leaving the heavy lifting to the US. Downing Street in the UK quickly pushed back, insisting Europe has acted, pointing to sanctions against Moscow and London's involvement in shaping the peace process. But Trump wasn't convinced. He continued pressing Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to accept a deal that would end the war, even suggesting Ukraine should consider giving up land to Moscow, an idea Zelensky has repeatedly rejected. Ukraine, meanwhile, says it is preparing to present a revised peace plan to the White House. In a post on X, Zelensky said European and Ukrainian officials have been actively refining all components of a potential path to peace, and that Kyiv is now ready to share the updated vision with its American partners. During the interview, Trump hinted that ideological divisions between the US and Europe could weaken long-standing alliances. When asked whether leaders he considers weak can still be trusted as allies, he replied, "It depends." He argued that Europe talks a lot but doesn't produce, allowing the war to drag on with no end in sight. Just days earlier, European leaders gathered in London to show unity and continue coordinating their support for Ukraine. But even that wasn't enough for Trump to sharpen his criticisms. He went further, claiming, without evidence, that Zelensky himself is now the main obstacle to peace, and alleging that Ukrainian negotiators loved the US-backed proposal, but that Zelensky hadn't read it. All of this comes as the Trump administration released its new 33-page national security strategy, which warns of Europe's potential civilizational erasure and questions whether some countries can remain reliable allies. Russia welcomed the strategy, calling it consistent with Moscow's worldview. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz responded by dismissing the claim that Europe needs saving by the US, insisting Europeans can handle their own democratic challenges. As pressure builds on Kyiv and frustrations rise in Europe, one thing is clear: the gap between Washington and its closest allies is widening, and the future of Ukraine's war strategy may depend on how this political drama unfolds in the weeks ahead. From within the Israeli-controlled zones of Gaza, a number of armed groups opposed to Hamas say they intend to keep fighting the Islamist movement, even after the killing of their most visible leader. These factions, which have operated more freely since an October ceasefire, report that their ranks have grown in recent months as they look to secure a long-term position in whatever political order emerges in Gaza's future. Although still relatively small and fragmented, the rise of these anti-Hamas groups has created new pressure on Hamas at a moment when the movement is trying to reassert its dominance after nearly 2 years of devastating conflict. Their presence also poses potential challenges for any efforts to stabilize Gaza, increasing the risk of internal clashes at a time when the enclave remains deeply divided and physically destroyed. In June, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu publicly acknowledged that Israel had provided support to certain clans and local networks opposed to Hamas, though Israeli officials have released few details since then. The best known of these efforts centered on Yasser Abu Shabab, a local figure who tried to build organized resistance to Hamas. His killing last week in Gaza's southern Rafah region dealt a significant symbolic blow. According to his group, the Popular Forces, he died while mediating a family dispute,
though the group did not disclose who was responsible. His deputy, Ghassan Duhain, has stepped into the leadership role and pledged to continue Abu Shabaab's mission. Hamas, which has controlled Gaza since 2007 and refuses to disarm under the current ceasefire framework, has denounced such groups as collaborators with Israel, a sentiment that Palestinian analysts say is widely shared among Gaza's population. After the ceasefire began, Hamas swiftly cracked down on individuals who challenged its authority, killing dozens of Palestinians, including people it accused of assisting Israel. While Hamas still governs the areas where nearly all of Gaza's 2 million residents live, and while its commanders say the group continues to field thousands of fighters despite the war's heavy toll, Israel maintains control over more than half of the territory. These Israeli-held zones have become the primary base of operations for groups hostile to Hamas, allowing them to function beyond the reach of the Islamist movement. With President Donald Trump's plan for Gaza stalled, there is no immediate prospect of further Israeli withdrawal from these regions. 3 Egyptian security and military officials say these groups have become more active since the ceasefire, estimating their total fighting force at around 1,000 members, an increase of roughly 400 since the truce began. Egypt, which shares a border with Gaza, has been closely involved in negotiations and expects these factions to intensify their activities unless a comprehensive political agreement for Gaza's future is reached. A diplomat familiar with the situation, speaking anonymously, said the groups have little genuine grassroots support among Palestinians. However, their sudden visibility has raised concerns about the possibility of future internal conflict, adding yet another layer of instability to an already fractured territory. Following Abu Shabaab's death, his group and at least 2 others released videos showing their armed members assembled in formation. In one recording from December 5, Duhain tells his fighters that Abu Shabaab's killing is a grave loss, while promising that they will pursue their mission with the same strength and even more. Reuters verified the footage as having been filmed in Rafah, where Israeli forces remain deployed. On December 7th, Duhain announced that 2 men, described as Hamas militants, had been executed in late November for killing a member of his group. A security official aligned with Hamas dismissed the event as insignificant, saying it did not change the realities on the ground. Hussam al-Astal, leader of another anti-Hamas faction operating in Khan Yunis, said he and Duhain had agreed that their war on terror would continue. Speaking to Reuters by phone, he said their shared New Gaza project was moving forward. In a separate call, al-Astal said his group had received weapons, funding, and other support from unnamed international friends. While he denied receiving direct Israeli military assistance, he acknowledged coordinating with Israel on the delivery of food and supplies needed to survive in the Israeli-controlled zone. Israel maintains that its overriding objective is to ensure Hamas is fully disarmed and excluded from any future governing structure in Gaza, a goal rooted in Hamas's attack on Israel on October 2023.
Renewed Thailand-Cambodia border fighting displaces hundreds of thousands. Surin, Thailand, AP. Fighting along the Thailand-Cambodia border intensified again on Wednesday, showing few signs of easing as artillery fire echoed across frontier communities and growing waves of evacuees strained emergency shelters on both sides. The renewed clashes, now stretching into their 5th day, have forced hundreds of thousands of civilians to flee their homes and raised fears that a long-simmering territorial dispute could spiral into a wider conflict. Associated Press reporters stationed in Thailand's Surin province described the sound of persistent outgoing indirect fire on Wednesday. Thai military spokesperson Rear Admiral Surasant Kongsiri confirmed that more than 400,000 people have now been evacuated from 4 affected border provinces. Authorities have closed roughly 700 schools, citing the risks of stray fire and shelling. Cambodia has also launched large-scale evacuations. Its defense ministry reported that over 127,000 villagers have been relocated to temporary shelters, while hundreds of schools were shuttered due to security concerns. Casualty numbers continued to rise. Thailand announced that 5 soldiers were killed in the latest round of fighting and dozens more were injured. Cambodia reported 7 civilian deaths and at least 20 wounded, although officials did not update those figures midweek. Both governments have signaled their intention to press on. Thai Prime Minister Anutin Chanvirakul vowed that Thailand would continue defending its territory, while Cambodia's influential Senate President Hun Sen pledged an equally strong response. The violent escalation has also produced diplomatic ripples. Cambodia abruptly withdrew its entire team from the 33rd Southeast Asian Games, which opened Tuesday in Thailand, citing concerns from the athletes' families about safety. The National Olympic Committee of Cambodia expressed regret over the decision, but said it had no choice under the circumstances. This latest confrontation erupted after a Sunday skirmish injured 2 Thai soldiers and effectively unraveled a U.S.-backed ceasefire that halted major fighting in July. That ceasefire, brokered by Malaysia and supported by then U.S. President Donald Trump, came only after Washington threatened to suspend key trade privileges unless both sides agreed to end hostilities. The July deal followed 5 days of intense combat that left dozens dead and displaced thousands. Speaking at a political rally in Pennsylvania late Tuesday, Trump suggested he would again intervene. "Tomorrow I'll have to make a phone call. Who else could say, I'm going to make a phone call and stop a war between 2 very powerful countries, Thailand and Cambodia?" U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio similarly urged both nations to uphold the commitments made during their October meeting in Malaysia, which reaffirmed the ceasefire and laid out steps including removing heavy weaponry from the border and coordinating efforts to clear landmines. However, Thailand's foreign ministry said Wednesday that there had been no contact from the United States regarding renewed mediation efforts. Ministry spokesperson Nikorndej Balankura added that Thailand is unlikely to accept another external mediator, saying the line has been crossed. Even before Sunday's clash, the ceasefire had been fragile. Both countries continued trading accusations and propaganda, while sporadic shooting incidents persisted along disputed areas. As tensions escalated, Thailand deployed jet fighters for targeted airstrikes, while Cambodia relied heavily on its BM-21 rocket launchers, truck-mounted systems capable of firing 40 rockets in rapid succession over ranges of up to 40 kilometers. Life inside the shelters. Away from the front lines, the humanitarian impact is becoming increasingly visible. In Surin, around 550 evacuees now crowd into a makeshift shelter inside a gymnasium. Many fled with only minutes to gather belongings as the first bombardments began on Sunday. Local officials have arranged meals, blankets, and activities for children, but anxiety remains high. Cool winter temperatures have helped keep conditions manageable, though residents speak of boredom, uncertainty, and the emotional strain of leaving homes, crops, and livestock behind. Tidarat Homhwal, a 37-year-old farmer staying in the shelter with her family, said she cannot stop thinking about the animals she had to leave. "I miss my pets so much," she said quietly. "The cows, the ducks, our 4 dogs, our 9 cats. We are behind the front line, so we are safe, but I want this to end. I really miss all my animals."
Ukraine ready for elections if security is guaranteed, Zelensky says. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has insisted that his country is ready for elections if international partners, chiefly the United States and Europe, can ensure the security conditions needed to hold a nationwide vote during wartime. His remarks came after U.S. President Donald Trump once again accused Kyiv of using war as an excuse to avoid elections, a claim that Ukrainian officials strongly reject. Zelensky's current 5-year term officially expired in May 2024. However, Ukraine has been under martial law since Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. and the Constitution prohibits holding national elections while the country is fighting an active war. Despite this, speaking to reporters after Trump's comments in a wide-ranging Politico interview, Zelensky signaled openness to discussing legal changes that could allow an election to take place. He said he has asked for proposals to amend existing legislation and outlined a potential timeline of 60 to 90 days if the United States and other allies commit to providing the security infrastructure needed for a free and safe vote. I am openly asking the United States, and perhaps together with our European colleagues, to help us ensure security for elections, Zelensky said. While emphasizing Ukraine's sovereignty, he reiterated that any decision must reflect the will of the Ukrainian people rather than external pressure. He dismissed suggestions that he was trying to cling to power or prolong the war for political gain, calling such claims completely unreasonable. Zelensky won the 2019 presidential election with more than 73% of the vote. Russia, however, has long portrayed Zelensky as an illegitimate leader and demanded new elections as a precondition for any ceasefire discussions, rhetoric that Trump echoed in his interview. They talk about democracy, but it gets to a point where it's not a democracy anymore, Trump said, accusing Kyiv of delaying a vote. But the obstacles to conducting an election during wartime are immense. Millions of Ukrainians are currently displaced across Europe and beyond. According to the United Nations, roughly 5.7 million people have fled the country. Ensuring their participation, along with that of soldiers deployed across active front lines, would require extraordinary logistical planning. Polling stations would need special security measures, advanced monitoring, and protection against Russian missile strikes, conditions that have not existed since the war began. Ukrainian opposition figures have also voiced skepticism. Lesya Vasilenko of the Golos Party told the BBC that elections are never possible in wartime, noting that even the United Kingdom suspended elections during World War II. Alexei Ogoncharenko of European Solidarity said the idea was completely impossible, arguing that a genuine campaign requires debates, mobilization, and media access, elements hard to achieve during ongoing military operations. Within Ukrainian political circles, there appears to be little appetite for elections at present. Oleksandr Mereshka, a senior MP from Zelensky's Servant of the People Party and head of Parliament's Foreign Policy Committee, said there was strong consensus across parties and civil society that elections should not be held under martial law. Even Zelensky's critics, he noted, oppose a wartime vote because they understand the risks. A campaign, he warned, would be exactly what Putin would want: a wedge to divide Ukrainian society from within after failing to conquer it from the outside. Public opinion also reflects caution. A March survey by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology found that 78% of Ukrainians opposed holding elections until after a complete peace settlement. By September, that number had decreased to 63%, but support for elections only after a ceasefire with security guarantees remained significant. Analysts say Zelensky has repeatedly stated he is open to elections when conditions allow, but those conditions remain elusive. Millions of refugees, frontline soldiers, and regions still under threat of attack make voting a complex and dangerous undertaking. You cannot guarantee the security of polling stations, said Hanna Shelest of Ukrainian Prism. Meanwhile, pressure from Washington continues to mount. Trump has pushed Zelensky to agree to a peace deal that could involve ceding territory to Russia, suggesting without evidence that the Ukrainian president is the main obstacle to ending the war. The Kremlin welcomed Trump's recent statements, saying they align closely with Russia's own position on Ukraine's territorial losses and NATO ambitions.
The fragile balance along the Thailand-Cambodia border has once again collapsed into violence. raising questions about the durability of U.S.-brokered ceasefires and the effectiveness of President Donald Trump's increasingly controversial tariff diplomacy. Only a few months ago, in July, a phone call from Trump, backed by the threat of harsh new tariffs, was credited with bringing a halt to 5 days of intense fighting between the Southeast Asian neighbors. At the time, Washington touted the ceasefire as proof that Trump's hardline trade tactics could be repurposed as tools of conflict mediation. But this week's renewed clashes underscore the limitations of that strategy. As artillery fire and skirmishes resumed along disputed stretches of the 817-kilometer, 508-mile border, Thailand delivered a clear message to Washington. Economic coercion cannot substitute for political negotiation. Bangkok's resistance is a test for Trump's tariff play. But the tariff has always been a blunt instrument, said Chong Ja-ian, a political scientist at the National University of Singapore. Analysts have long questioned whether tariffs, typically levied for trade imbalances, can serve as sustainable leverage in geopolitical flashpoints. Trump has promoted tariffs not only as economic tools, but as a kind of diplomatic pressure valve, citing them earlier this year when he claimed credit for helping ease tensions between India and Pakistan. That assertion was swiftly rejected by New Delhi, which insisted that its de-escalation efforts were unrelated to U.S. trade moves. The episode strained relations between the world's two largest democracies, highlighting how economic pressure can backfire in complex regional conflicts. This week, speaking at a rally in Pennsylvania, Trump said he expected to place a phone call on Wednesday to stop the fighting between Thailand and Cambodia, though he provided no further details. Thai officials, however, appear reluctant to frame the conflict through Washington's trade lens. Foreign Minister Sihasak Puongketkeow emphasized that ongoing trade negotiations and the border standoff must remain separate. In October, the United States and Thailand announced a reciprocal trade framework maintaining a 19% tariff on Thai imports while proposing future areas for tariff reductions. We feel that it's unjust already that we should be subject to a unilateral tariff of 19%, and perhaps they want to impose even more tariffs if they're not happy, Sihasak said. The timing of the renewed violence is politically sensitive for Thailand. Prime Minister Anutin Chanvarakul, who assumed office in September after his predecessor was pushed out over the border issue, is preparing to dissolve parliament next month ahead of snap elections in March. His Bumchai-type party is already under pressure due to criticism of the government's slow response to deadly southern floods. According to Laura Schwartz of Verisk Maplecroft, the border crisis could become a key test of Anutin's leadership credentials as he seeks to rally public support. Nationalist sentiment is rising as well. Anutin previously faced backlash from hardline factions when he endorsed a Trump and Malaysia-brokered ceasefire earlier this year, said Voronai Vanajaka of Thammasat University. So he's going to keep Trump away for now, Voronai said, suggesting the Prime Minister may distance himself from Washington's involvement. Public trust also tilts heavily toward the military, which has taken the toughest stance against Cambodia. A national poll in August found that Thais overwhelmingly view the armed forces as more credible than political leaders when safeguarding national borders. Despite the risk of retaliatory U.S. tariffs, analysts believe Thailand calculates that the conflict will remain limited and that its superior military capabilities give it a strategic edge. Thailand may face an immediate tariff blowback, but it is betting on its military superiority and the limited nature of the conflict, Chong said. It probably believes that it can prevail, and that the Trump administration will ultimately accept that outcome.